So thank you so much for having me. Located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where it's quite beautiful here today. And what I'm going to sort of talk about is about security and how to kind of like approach building, like getting your data scientists to work on data in a secure environment and interfacing with those other parts of the company. And one of the sort of things I was thinking about while I was sort of trying to figure out what to say about this is that there's not really a kind of right answer in terms of what level of security you need for any of these systems. So these are kind of like general strategies, very general strategies. I think the particular things you need to do, like we need this kind of authentication, or the data needs to be stored in this play way or tracked in some fashion, are going to be individual to the place that you work. So this is kind of more about like how do you work with the people and systems at your company, and how do you set those things up to be successful. Um, so this is my lovely stove picture. And some things over. So a little bit about Socure. So Socure is an identity company. So we build basically models and data products that help people identify fraudsters. So whenever you apply for like a bank or a credit card, your bank sends your information to either a company like ours or another model or an internal model to sort of check like, are you really who you say you are? And this is for regulatory reasons to make sure that people aren't like laundering money. It's also for just loss prevention. Like fraud costs companies a lot of money, so they try to do things that um, reduce fraud. Um, and we're the best at that. So we have some of the best products in these markets, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've kind of from the start set up systems where we're able to confidently work with very, very sensitive data of various different kinds and segregate data that's more sensitive from data that's less sensitive. And using those kind of data assets, we're able to build these kind of um, pretty wonderful models. We're also going through a period of very, very fast growth. So where our revenue is basically growing, depending on how you count revenue, 100% and 200% year over year. We started the year at 120 people. We're probably going to be growing to about 500 people at the end of this year. So we're hiring. That's if you are interested in this area, it's rewarding and a wonderful place to work. Um, and so this puts a lot of pressure on security, and because the kind of ways you have to think about security when you're growing this fast are slightly different from the ways that you can think about security at a larger um, company. Just because if you sort of imagine like, so I started at Socure 2 years ago, and I'm one of the more senior people there, right? So all the people who joined after me have like less context about why do we have things set up this way? What are the risks? What's the threat model? All those different things. But I found it really helpful environment to sort of learn this stuff because I think if you can kind of build secure systems at these sort of like fast growing company places, it really helps to think about how to make them work at all different types of companies. So that's just a little bit of context. I want to sort of talk about what I sort of think of as the bad place, the security bad place that a lot of places find themselves in. And this is kind of the basic conflict between data scientists and really everybody else. But you could say a similar conflict occurs between like salespeople and security people, some degree like engineers and security people, but definitely data scientists and security people, it's the worst. And the basic conflict is that the safest way to deal with sensitive data is to just delete it, right? To not use it. If you can't delete it, you want to make sure that you don't give anybody access to it. And if you can't prevent people from accessing it at all, you want to have like a small number of people, and it has to be really, really annoying to access, right? So those are kind of like from a security perspective, that's the hierarchy of data safety, right? And as soon as you have somebody who's actually like, I'm going to go open up a data set and look at, the emails or look at the name, that's a kind of like security nightmare for people. But from a data science perspective, like there's a lot of insight that you're getting from that data that you actually do need to look at the data. So for example, if we have like a fraudster, a fraud ring coming in, they might have like a particular email pattern, which we don't know about until you actually kind of look at that those scores. You know, look at them and say like, okay, like what are the emails that are, causing us to decide this person is fraudulent? Like, what does that make sense? And at some point, you maybe can build an automated system to detect that pattern. But at some point, data scientists do need to actually like be able to look at the data in some environment, right? Um, so what I've noticed that happens with security is security groups, I'm just going to refer to that as security. Like, so this is maybe like compliance people, security engineers, the people who are there to try to make sure that your company doesn't get hacked and, your employees don't leave, their laptops at, coffee shops with precious information on them. Um, so security, like they'll come into a situation and they'll try to fix something that's broken. That's an old system that was set up some way that, maybe it was good at the time, or maybe it was just never thought about, but it's some bad old system. And they'll say like, look, this is a big, problem, right? Like there could be an attack here. We got to fix this, right? But in order to fix it, they have to direct money from new projects to fix the old ones. And usually, like in most companies, like the groups that are responsible for security don't actually have the power to direct resources like that. And so they have to sort of try to have this fight between like the value that these new things will do versus fixing the old ones. And oftentimes they don't get their way and that old fix doesn't happen. But the power that security does always have is the power to veto new things, right? So when a new project comes in, it usually goes through a security review, and if it fails, it doesn't get put in place, right? So you have this situation where like the company can't fix the old security problems, but then can't also put in new systems in place because they get vetoed, right? And this is kind of like on some level, like the third one is sort of like partially, I think, an emotional reaction to the second one. Like people didn't feel heard about the big problem, so they maybe like enforce those policies like too strictly for some new systems. Um, Everybody thinks that the other side is unreasonable. Like, so the data scientists feel like security is just putting roadblocks, like needless roadblocks in their place. And they're like, this is way safer than the old thing that we were doing. So why not do this new one? Security thinks that the rest of the business doesn't care about security. And then everybody just stops talking. So I think this is really common, and it's worth knowing that even if this isn't like a real problem at your business, most of the people who are coming into that business have had experiences at other companies that are like this. So like pretty much all the security people I know have had situations where they were like, I was at this other job and there was this like giant fire of a bad system that never got fixed, and it was so frustrating, and I left. Right, so they're kind of carrying that from job to job. And data scientists, I think, often feel like we've had all these experiences where it's like, I could produce so much value, but I just can't get access to the data that I need to actually produce that value. So that's the bad place. So this is a really big problem because it's sort of all of the friction of a high security environment with none of the security. Because all of these kinds of hacks or security issues, they're adversarial usually. So somebody is looking for the weak link in your company's armor. And it really doesn't matter if 40% of your systems are secure or if 90% of your systems are secure, because they will tend to find the holes, right? So you kind of want to always focus your energy on like lifting the floor of your business rather than having like some small number of things that are like super duper secure. The analogy that I kind of use for this is like if all of your windows in your house are open, it doesn't really matter if you lock the door, right? Like a burglar is going to like just go through the window. So you get this sort of system where you've put in a lot of friction, like a lot of fights. Your business can't move very quickly, but you haven't really gained that much in terms of security overall. So as a data scientist, you can help with this problem by kind of trying to understand and like being intentional about being an ally to the security parts of your organization. Because oftentimes when a like decision makers are hearing security issues from several different places in the company, they're much more likely to be fixed. So if it's not just coming from the people who are kind of always bringing up security issues, like if it's coming from somebody else as well, like that's a really powerful way of making progress on these things. Um, and something that's helped me think about this is just to sort of like think about the mindset of somebody whose job it is to identify low probability risks at a business, right? And so this is kind of, they live in this like lonely, anxious world. Like they're often saying no to awesome stuff. Everybody else is like, this would be so awesome. And then the security person is like, no, we're not doing that. That would be awful. And there's also just this a lot of anxiety, right? Like they don't get any positive feedback, right? If like nothing happens, it's not because they're like, oh, this is I did such a great job, right? It's just like I'm just constantly worried about these small, low probability things that will happen that I'll have missed that will sink the business, right? So it's a really like high anxiety workplace. So it's kind of like understanding that and like putting yourself in that mindset when you're talk to people in security is really helpful, because you can kind of sort of like talk about like like basically just sort of like not think of that they're being ridiculous, right? Like it's often something where it's like the thing that seems to you as being like overly strict is often because like when you spend your time thinking about these, things that happen 1 in 100 times, but that are really tragic, it's you're sort of more likely to find those things and think that they're important. Um, Another good thing to do is just to talk about security projects. So pretty much everywhere that I've worked, there's a list of things where it's just like, these are important security projects that we have not done because for whatever reason they just haven't gotten to the top of the pile, because there's always new things going on the top of the pile and they kind of get worse and worse over time. So being somebody who's kind of just like not part of that security organization, but is just like aware of those issues and continues to bring them up over and over and over again, helps the rest of the like compliance security teams sort of realize that you're on their side when you're talking about building any of these systems. Um, and then do things like sort of have one-on-ones with people, just sort of talk to them about like their job, what they're working on, develop those things. And then the last one, which I think is really important, is that prove that you can make progress on these things. Like so that prove to security that you, the data scientist who's handling this stuff, can push these things through and accomplish them. You can start with small little things that are like security bad practices on the data science team, like improving those a little bit and being able to demonstrate that is really important. Why is that important? It's important because when you're setting up a system, it allows you to make promises to security and compliance groups and have them believe you. So you can say like, we're putting this in place now because it's better than what we had before. Here are the 3 or 4 things we'd like to improve over the next 6 months. And if you don't do this, where you kind of like demonstrate over and over again that you're going to like move that security ball forward, they're going to say, no, like we have to do everything all the requirements today on day one, because I don't trust that you're going to actually do what you say you're going to do in terms of delivering on these patches, basically. So if you kind of do all of that, like, and sort of start thinking of yourself, and maybe this is like a whole data science team, or maybe it's like a couple of people on that team. So at Socure, this is something that I've done basically as kind of like a liaison between the big group of data scientists and the big group of security people. So now basically like those groups don't feel like they need to talk to each other as much. Like they both can talk to me and my team, and we can sort of translate and be like, like have the context of what the data scientists are trying to do, have this context of what the security people are trying to do, and be able to like find the sort of solution that kind of like works for both groups. But once you kind of do that, it sort of unlocks a lot of the rest of it. But if you can't get out of that bad place, you're not going to be able to develop things that are very secure in my experience. And you're also not going to be able to develop things that are amenable to really productive data science work. So this is like, I know this is a little funny, spend 10 minutes to talk about like, you should be friends with your coworkers, but I work in a tech company, so it's like important to do that. Okay, so the thing, once you kind of have that relationship, like I think it's important to come up with just a list, like an ordered list of security priorities as they relate to data science. And this is it's important to do that and to kind of like think about this as a like just to speak in a real basic language, because a lot of times like people who work in security don't really have a good sense of like what it is that data scientists do, and like what do you do day to day, right? Like the programming that data scientists do is very different from the programming that you would do as a like an application software engineer. It's much more like a process of discovery than it is a process of implementation, a lot of those different things. And then these two things that I would really highlight are to precisely articulate the business value of the data science work. And this is at Socure, like this is kind of easy on one level because we're a data science company. All we sell are statistical models, basically. So we can sort of say in general, like our work is valuable to the company. It's the main product that we sell. But being really precise about it helps to narrow down like what kind of data access you need. So when you're more precise about the business value that you're producing, you might sort of say like, okay, well actually like I can get that same business value with 10% of the people, only 10% of the people having access to this sensitive data. Or I can get that same business value with the same sort of like productive velocity if I'm, using like this kind of environment versus this other one. But being really, really sort of uh, like specific about like why do you need to access this data? Like why does it like why do you need to do that? What's the value that that particular piece of access provides to the company? Helps you sort of narrow things down and also like convince people that that access is worthwhile, right? If you can sort of say like, look, here's the business value that this access grants us, you're going to have a lot better time getting that access. An example of this is sort of say you have like a database that has intermingled data that's like sensitive and not sensitive, and most of your business value might be accessing the non-sensitive data, but since you only have the one database account, right? Like you kind of by accessing the the non-sensitive data, you might also be exposing the sensitive data. So that's an example of something where you're like, okay, if we like split that data apart, so that we put the sensitive data in a whole other place, you're able to be more like just even like the data scientists are doing the same amount of work, same positive stuff. They're just at like the collateral access is lower. Similarly, from the security side, get them to precisely articulate the threat model that they're worried about. And this kind of goes back to that sort of like vague anxiety that people have, which is like you just have this vague anxiety of stuff, and then you just veto things because you're just like I'm just anxious. I don't want any kind of breach. But when you sort of are like more intentional about like what kinds of attacks are we trying to prevent, you have a better chance of kind of like right sizing the security access. So an example of this is like, you might worry about mistake from your company. Like you don't want your employees making a mistake and putting a file in some place that they shouldn't be putting it. Or you might worry that they're malicious, that your employees are actually going to try to steal this data from you and sell it to somebody else, right? Those are very, very different threat models. And the systems that you're going to design that are going to be good for the first one are not going to be good for the second one. And oftentimes, like when security groups will have like some internal version of that, but getting them to tell you that so that in a way that you can understand and communicate to the rest of the people who work with you is going to help you get buy-in from data scientists to use those systems, and also just sometimes give you an opportunity to kind of argue back a little bit about what you really need to do. And then the sort of goal of this is just like an ordered list of like, these are the big security problems that we have, and we're going to try to go down this list from top to bottom and fix them. And you might be in terms of priority, you might also include some things like how easy are these things to do or not. But coming up with this thing where everybody's agreeing these are the main things, and then that's where we're going to try to put our energy towards to raise the floor for your security thing rather than trying to fix the new ones, is really helpful. Okay, so that's all kind of like prologue. These are my three principles for building secure systems. One is child-proof rooms. Second one is developer experience as a security problem. And third one is to buy things and not build them. Let's talk about child-proof rooms. This is my daughter's playroom. And this is kind of like, I feel like the perfect analogy for what you want to do with data scientists, especially new data scientists who have just joined your company. You want to give them a place that has all of their stuff that is really nice and that they can't like burn your house down, right? And so it's a place where you can like just say like go play, like go do your thing in here, and I will make sure I will do the work to make sure that this room as a whole is safe, so I can like you know go cook dinner or something like that. But all your books are in here, all your toys are in here. It's got all the CPU and RAM that you need, and you can sort of go nuts. So they're really like places where people can't hurt the company. And this is the only way that you can onboard people quickly and have it be safe, because there's no way that a new employee in their first month of work is going to be able to understand like the security and regulatory environments that Socure operates in. Like the only way that we're going to be able to get them to abide by those policies is if we kind of make the situation, the environment that they're in, enforce those policies. So this kind of means that when you put those secure things inside the system that you're building, you don't have to tell people about it as much, right? Because it's just like that's just what it is. You don't need to tell people that like that, like it's kind of like I don't know, whenever you go into like a really well designed like hospital or something like that, like how you use these various different things is obvious. Like there's only one natural way of doing it. And that's kind of what you're going for. You don't want to have a situation where you're basically like having people read 100-page policy documents and expecting that they're going to abide by them. Nobody can do that. And definitely new people can't. So if you think about like our stuff, like if we have like 100 people starting in the next 3 months, we're not going to be able to teach them how security works. Like we're going to be able to build a system such that they can just drop in there and work, and it is secure, and we're confident about that. But there's no way for it to. There's no way to do this without like having the thing be kind of like childproof. Like it's something where they don't need to be a grown up person at the company. They can just go for it as a toddler. So the next one is this idea of that developer experience is a core security problem. And so this is something that I think is not well understood by people who work in security in their day-to-day. Because people who work in security come from a model where it's just like, it's kind of like a police model or a legal model, where it's like, I'll just say what the law is, right? Like I'll put some policy out, I'll say what the law is, and then everybody's just going to do that, right? And like we have really smart, thoughtful employees. Like they understand that they're supposed to be following the rules, so like they'll just do what we tell them to do. And there'll be some email that goes out, and everybody will read that email, everybody will understand it, everybody will be able to apply it to their experience, and like they'll just do the right thing. But that's not what happens, because it turns out that like you just don't have the enforcement mechanisms for those policies. So once your company gets even a little bit big, you're not able to really audit what exactly everybody is doing. And all of the people who you've hired are like, you've hired them because they're like really clever with computers. And people who are really clever with computers can like sort of subtly circumvent things that even if they might not know that they're not supposed to be doing something, they might kind of know that they shouldn't do it, but it's like some really urgent project and they've got to just get something out the door, right? Like people will always sort of like end up taking some little shortcuts around something that they find burdensome, right? So if the thing that is secure is also like a pain to use, difficult, unappealing, some people are going to not use it. And that's all you really need, is like some people not using the secure process. So you can either make it so that it's impossible for them to do the wrong thing, like you've put up like big walls, or you can sort of understand their motivation, which is that they want to get their work done as easily as possible. And so if you assume that they're going to do the easy thing, right, and you can make the right thing easy, then you can have some confidence that they're going to tend to do the right thing, right? Like if you make it, like put up some roadblocks around, make it super irritating to do some process that you think is insecure, and then also give them a really, really convenient way of doing this more secure process, you're going to have a lot of success with adoption. And I actually think from a security perspective, adoption is one of the big problems, is just actually like getting people to do the thing, and getting them to not like push back on it So like if you're trying to get something in place, you do often have to actually go through someone who is saying like who is listening to their teammates to say like is this actually going to be workable? And if it's not workable, they'll kind of like escalate it and have some fight about whether they should put it in place. But if you kind of make it so that it's both easy and secure, you just avoid that whole conflict, and it makes it a lot easier to get these things out the door. Um, so the ways that I've used to build good developer experiences for secure projects, the first one I think is really, really crucial, is to control the client libraries. So we have a set of internal R packages, a set of internal Python packages, and and they're great to use. They've gotten good adoption. And so what that means is that we basically have a layer of abstraction between the user and however that's interfacing with some kind of backend system. So we might have like some function so we have a function, for example, that connects to a database. This function has been around in that package for years, right? But over my history there, I think we've probably changed some mechanism of how that database connection works, maybe 7 or 8 times, right? And that's just like iterative things where it's just like, okay, like we're gonna, do credentials in a different way. We're gonna like use some other, tokens, whatever, to make that access more secure. And the users never knew, right? Like it's because it's just basically like we've thought about their experience, and like part of their experience is like they should never have to learn a new database connection algorithm. Like they shouldn't need to know how AWS like access tokens work. Yeah, that's not something that's relevant to their job. Like they just want to connect to the database. And so since we control the clients, we can make those changes. We can first of all like promise to security like this is how everybody is connecting to these databases. Like here's the state of the world right now. We can tell them like if you make this change, I'll be able to push that out, in however long, a week or a day or something. Um, and we can guarantee that once we make that change, everybody is going to be on the same page and there's not going to be any user disruption because we know like the scope of that, basically the promise that we're making to the user about like what those things should do. Um, so the next thing is to like think about security from like a product sales perspective. Like you're actively selling the product to the user, even if at some point you're going to be able to basically say like like we're not asking anymore, right? Like this is just the rule. Like, we're gonna do it this way, and it's just that's how it's gonna happen. But to start with actually thinking of it more like you're selling a product. And one of the ways of selling secure systems that's really helpful is to say is that most data scientists who work on sensitive data, it just is like freaky. Like it's just you do not want to do it. It makes you really nervous. You're worried about leaving it somewhere. You're worried about making a mistake, right? And so if you sell them and you say like, look, if you start using this system, like you don't need to worry about those mistakes anymore. Like the system will handle it for you, right? So even if it's like maybe a little bit less convenient to use, like at least you're sort of like selling to them saying like, like you can relax in this environment, because it's the whole thing is more secure. One of my first data science jobs was working on youth criminal justice data for the Nova Scotia government, and it was actually under like a air gap, so I had to like work on this like no internet connection computer with like no R libraries. And on some level, it was like really irritating, but on the other level, I was like, oh, I'm kind of so happy to just like be here and not have to worry that I'm gonna like leave this, like send like accidentally email a file and then go to jail, right? Like, so there's some level of just like comfort of having something that's secure. And so, but if you approach it as like, like security is just like making us do this terrible thing, right? Like you're going to get a lot of pushback and you're going to like get a lot of people who are going to find problems with it rather than helping you make the system delightful and better. But if you kind of think about it from the start as like, we have these security things that we all care about and we want to move those forward. And here's the value that you're getting personally, that the business is getting. It helps you kind of make progress with this. The third one is to pair restrictions with power. So this is kind of like always ship security things with functionality. And this helps a lot, right? Like, so if you give people something where it's just irritating, right? Like they're gonna be irritated. If you give them something where there's irritation and like something that they really want together in one release, it helps kind of make the medicine go down, to have something that's like some new functionality, new capacity that's going with it. And then the last one is that looks really matter. So whenever you're building a secure system, one of the most neglected things is user experience and design. And so spending a bit of time just saying like, we're building a secure web application. Like let's do a sprint with, a UX designer and like somebody to make this look nice, right? Let somebody to make this kind of feel snappy, right? One of the ways that I've kind of personally worked on this a lot is, we replaced a number of like kind of like reporting functionalities that were a little not secure enough with some Shiny applications, and the focus on that is basically just like it's important to make that application look good, even if there's no security benefit at all to that, but it's just something that again, like thinking about this as an external product that you're selling, you want to make sure that everything is kind of like pleasant to be around, like fast enough, snappy enough, responsive, doesn't crash, and then just like doesn't look like a GeoCities website from 1992. Do they even have websites in 1992? I'm not sure. Okay, so I have a little interlude for a case study about our dear host, which is RStudio Connect. So we implemented RStudio Connect to host Shiny applications. And what we kind of discovered, basically, like I was putting together a way of hosting Shiny applications using like Docker. And as part of this, this went through a security review. It was vetoed basically because it was not, it didn't fulfill a bunch of security requirements, and I didn't have the skills to put those requirements in place myself. And this was kind of one of those cases where it was like the new system got the heavy security scrutiny, and even though it was probably a step forward from a security perspective, it wasn't quite far enough in terms of getting to where we wanted to go. So we also realized that as we were doing this, that we could like, so RStudio Connect like gave us that authentication that we needed, gave us the logging, tracking, auditing capabilities that we needed to host Shiny applications. But then as we were kind of using it, we were like, oh, we can replace a lot of different things with this. Like there's a lot of ways that we're communicating what we call like company confidential information, which is not PII, but is, like things that are our personal IP that we're worried about being out in the world. And we realized we could sort of like replace a lot of those things with hosted R Markdown or different things like that. So it was also something that we could childproof, right? Like we can build clients to maybe allow things on, one environment and not allow them on RStudio Connect. We can put on like network level controls over what RStudio Connect can talk to in the rest of Socure systems. So it let us sort of put something up where it's like, look, if you're, hosting something here, it's gonna like be safe enough, and it's going to be like safe, and you're not going to hurt anything. And it also kind of like let us build this environment where like data scientists could deploy things, and we knew that that was okay, right? So like this has happened a lot with. So one of the things I've done a number of times is like have. So our package has. Like it doesn't have a lot of security in terms of who is able to download and install our package. It doesn't have any sensitive things in it. But one of the ways is we have like functions that will like refer to a pinned file on RStudio Connect or refer to an API that's hosted on RStudio Connect. And so there we have like user authentication on those files or our APIs. So somebody can use a function from the R package, and it'll basically like behave differently, basically like pick up who is that person and kind of reference these like, Connect products. And we know that all of those products are okay because the whole system has been kind of verified and hardened. So we're able to, host the different things that we kind of use on that system without needing to worry about without needing to worry too much about like the individual products don't need to be audited. The individual products don't need to go through a compliance review every single time because it's kind of gotten this whole environment has been blessed basically. And then the last one is, or the second last one is it paired restrictions, which is like you're not allowed to email this stuff anymore. Like you're not allowed to, this is, you have to share it using this way that we can track who's looking at every single document if we need to, with power. It's like reproducible. It's you can schedule things, that kind of stuff. So that led people, like people didn't really notice the restrictions because we were giving them something that was so much more powerful and more convenient in terms of their work. And then the last one is that it's just easy to use and pretty. And so this was something that like when we were looking at it, like that's not a security thing. Like that wasn't why we bought it. Like we didn't buy it like from a hosting Shiny applications. Like it just needed something that would authenticate people and log them, right? There's lots of different ways that we could have done that. But this was one that kind of like did a bunch of other stuff and also had a really, really pleasant developer experience. And that has been very successful in terms of people naturally want to use it. And so that means that they're naturally not doing the other stuff that's not approved that we don't know about. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was buying software, and I wanted to give you an economic argument about why buying software is always better from a security perspective. And this is an argument that you can use to get licensing money from your company. So at most companies, security is a cost center. What a cost center is something the company needs to spend money on, but doesn't make revenue based on in the short term. So like you need to spend money on an office space, or you used to. You don't directly make money on the office building, right? You make money on the stuff that happens in that office building. And different companies have different parts of their business are cost centers, different parts are revenue centers. But for most of us who work Socure doesn't make secure systems, right? Like we make money off of our models and like the security stuff to make sure that we can develop those models safely and we don't have a breach. We don't, like for ethical and business reasons, we don't want to have that to happen. That's a cost. It's an important cost. It's one we're happy to pay, but it's a cost. Um, so every business or almost every business is going to go through rough times where they don't have enough cash flow. And in those times, they were going to cut costs, they were going to neglect cost centers, and they're going to put money into revenue centers. So the place that actually puts money on the balance sheet. And they'll do this even if it's in the long run, bad idea. Like even if it's a long run mistake to cut those cost centers, like cut those security people, cut those DevOps people, when you're kind of get in a threatening economic situation or a threatening business situation, you just need to put revenue back on the business. You need to get it back into the black. So you'll tend to neglect cost centers. So while security is a cost for you, for the vendor, it is a revenue center, right? So if Databricks or Studio is thinking about like, should I invest in wrapping this brand new awesome security protocol, right? If they do that, there's going to be some customer out there who's going to buy their product because they did that, right? So they're going to put money and stuff into that thing, even in like times where their business is difficult, right? Because like that's a big part of what the product is that they're selling. Like they're selling something that is secure, something that is compliant, something that works for all these companies that they're trying to sell to. So whenever you buy software or license software, you're basically like moving security from from living in your cost center world to being in like the revenue center of your business, right? Because you're kind of like offshoring it to some degree. So a little bit, it's like a maintenance commitment to the future about we're going to keep this up to date. Like we're buying the software now, we're also committing to paying like licensing fees for the next however long we use this thing. And that's kind of like putting a little bit of money every year into that system getting better and more secure. So um, this is really important also if you're growing, because as you're growing, your security requirements change, right? So the things that so when I was doing that review about how do we host Shiny apps securely, that was in the security world of a small startup that might not make it. Now Socure is like we have a billion-dollar valuation. We're in Forbes, like we're a much, much bigger target than we were. So our security requirements have changed dramatically, right? The nice thing about buying software is that your vendor has other clients, has built these products for clients that have big company problems, right? So if you're a small company and you buy these things, right, like you might look at it and be like, well, like I don't need that, I don't need that, I don't need that, right? But as you grow, like suddenly you discover like you need all of those things. Um, And then the thing about like growth is that you at some point you start being limited by people and not money, right? So like it takes maybe 6 months or something to like hire and onboard like a new DevOps person, and like we can't sort of just hire 20 of them all at once. So right now, like we're really grateful for any opportunity where we can spend licensing money to avoid development work, because we have like tons of development work that is in our core business that there are no vendors for, right? So anything that we can do where we're able to basically say like, like I'm going to put like licensing money onto this problem, helps us grow, right? Because like we can just basically like just keep giving our vendor more cash, right, for more licenses and like support and for the most part, the support like works itself out relative to if we were trying to sell these things, or well, relative to if we were trying to build these things ourselves. So our Studio Server or Studio Workbench is a good case study of this. So when we first implemented this, it was for mostly remote R development. Like we were a pretty much universal R team on our stuff. So we wanted something where it was like giving people more compute power, giving them like remote environments so that people could like so that we knew that the data was location safe. And so it could be like controlled and audited, and you can like shut people's access off, stuff like that. But like after we bought that system and started putting it together, like so we could have basically like built this remote environment, our environment with a number of open source tools, right? We could have used the open source RStudio. We could have used just a server with like a terminal, right? There's tons of different ways we could have done this. That would have been cheaper in the short term for it. But basically, like after we bought our studio server, like they keep working on it, and it kept getting better. So a lot of these sort of like things that in when we were first thinking about it were either like not at all security requirements or were things that were on our kind of like nice to have list. Like at some point in our growth, like we would have, maybe we were selling something to a client, they would have some questions about, how is your data science environment authenticated, right? And it would be and it would be something where I was like, if you're for authenticating in way A, like we're not interested. If you're authenticating way B, like that'll pass our audit of your work, right? And so there were many times where basically like because we had bought this system and basically just kept getting these patches and updates every time we just did the little like there's a new release, let's just spend 2 minutes sudo installing the new release. We got those things. They weren't free, but didn't require any work, right? We didn't have to do some urgent sprint to get those out of the box. They were just kind of the thing had kept like sort of accumulating features over time. And we've sold product based on that. So it's something where I think this is something that's really underrated about buying software. Is just that they like you shouldn't think of it in terms of like building the short-term thing and whether it's more or less expensive to buy or build. You should think about it like how do we want to like do we want to spend the money and commit the people to maintain the system that we build forever, or do we want to pay somebody else to maintain the system that we like do forever? And I think unless like your business is less this the thing is actually like really really core to your company, like you're the best in the world at that thing, usually you should try hard to buy things. Um, and then the other one is that in addition to this, like going back to that kind of developer experience stuff, that they're also adding like developer experience things all the time as well, right? And this isn't true like this is an RStudio hosted event, so that's part of why I'm talking about these RStudio things. But I think this is true of really any vendor that you're doing. Usually, if you trust that vendor, they're going to have more skilled people working on this problem than you have in-house, right? So the product that you're going to get out of that is better. And the example here is that we moved several teams to be Python teams at Socure for a variety of kind of like hiring and hiring reasons, and that was something again we kind of just had out of the box. We didn't need to like wasn't part of our initial purchasing decision really at all, but it was something that we had like that we were able to add, and then that meant that we could just save a lot of like development work, but also kind of like centralize access to some of these things where it's like you're like, okay, this is the world that we're working on. We want kind of everybody to adhere by these things, and we have like some examples where at least for many different groups of people it was successful. Um, so those are my three principles. So basically, like my advice for this, and this is again like there's not very much here about like you need to have this technical setup. I can answer questions about that if it's helpful. Although I think probably there are usually better people to answer that. But I do think that this is kind of like an organizational, social thing to a lot of degrees. So like work hard at like developing a relationship with your security teams where you all feel like you're on the same team. Try to set up child-proof environments, or maybe like data science-proof environments or whatever. Think about developer experience as a security problem. Like if they're not at odds with each other. It's not like pick security or convenience. Like you actually need your secure systems to be convenient for them to be successful. And then last, like try hard to buy things. And there are good economic reasons why the one you buy is going to be better than the one you build. And then lastly, we are hiring in huge numbers. We have a lot of people who are dedicated to R developers, as well as many dedicated Python developers, and some people who do both. So if you would like to hear more about this, if fraud is an area that you're interested in, please feel free to reach out. My information is here, and I'm also on the LinkedIn group. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gordon. That was awesome. I feel like that it's so valuable for so many different industries right now. I'm thinking of a lot of conversations I've had with customers in the past who are kind of like selling even the idea of data science internally to their teams, where those points are really relevant there. Just a reminder, if people have questions, you can use the Zoom chat here as well, but there's also the Slido link where you can ask anonymous questions. And Gordon, one that has been upvoted is, how did you communicate R packages to your security team? Oh, you might be muted.
Um, so like what an R package is, or you mean like external R packages? It's probably external ones.
Yeah, I think it's just probably coming. I've heard this from a few different teams before as well, but if someone doesn't know really what R is, how do you
Yeah.
explain the idea of packages?
Yeah. So I mean, I think like packages are like you could sort of think about it like I mean, JavaScript libraries, they're the same. So the way I sort of think about it from a security perspective, and this is kind of like another way where having a robust like internal package is really helpful, because like I feel like I'm able to make decisions about whether a package should be included in our work in a way that other data scientists are not, because I've sort of done a fair amount of just like package development, so I kind of know I can look at packages and be like, how good is this package? Like, how solid is its development, or like who developed it, right? Like, so if like I'm much more likely to trust packages that are maintained by a professional, like somebody whose job it is to maintain that, and one that's ad hoc. I'm much more likely to trust ones that are popular than ones that aren't. Um, so if you're kind of like exposing, like have an internal package that you're working on that like does almost everything that people need it to do, you'll be able to make that decision of just like, I'm not going to take on that dependency. I'm going to do that in base R, using the packages that I already use. And So that's one piece of it. The other piece is just of like I would this is kind of like articulating a threat model as part of that, where you're just basically like I think sometimes security people will worry more about an R package than they will worry about a JavaScript library, even though the JavaScript library is probably going to be hacked before the R one is, just because of surface area. Like there's more JavaScript people out there, and actually like for putting something on npm or something like that, like the requirements of doing that are much lower than releasing something to CRAN. Not CRAN is not a security thing at all, but just that there are these other places where we inject dependencies all the time. And so I would say like the main thing I would sort of argue for there is like to try to get kind of like a fair assessment. Like how is it that we monitor whether somebody is using the right npm packages or not? Like how do we know that those aren't malicious? Okay, like we'll do the same thing. But if you kind of don't get them to actually articulate what you're worried about. Like is it name, like there's something called name squatting, which there's a big Python. It wasn't an attack, but it was a thing where you like have a Python package that is like if you just release a new version of the Python package, you'll install that one even if it's malicious. So there's sort of like name squatting. Like there's various different types of ways that like installing an external library can be dangerous, but just writing down like what particular ways are we worried about, and then figuring out how your thing matches or doesn't match. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, like having a internal like air-gapped package repository. A lot of different ways you can do that, but you just kind of want to make sure that you're not doing this thing where it's like because it's like a language that you don't relate with like it's impossible for people to imagine building a web application without npm, right? So that's the same for R, right? So I'd say finding like that analogy of just like what these things are and how they work, is helpful.
Thank you. I see there's one other question on Slido that was anonymous. How do you deal with a security team that has less knowledge on best practice than the data science team?
Like the security, probably, yeah, like the security, like if you're having something where you don't trust your security engineers to have super good ideas. I haven't ever been in that situation, so I don't know. The security people, especially at Socure, are very very good. But I would say that like you have to meet people where they're at, right? And people have power within organizations, and you just have to deal with that power. So I think it's so I think like not getting frustrated, right? And not like as soon as you start talking to somebody who has power over a system as though they're an idiot, right? You've lost. You're done, right? You're not going to make any progress with that. So you need to like look at their sort of work, look at their stuff, and try to understand it in a sympathetic way, right? And one of the tools that I do a lot is I kind of like like repeating things back to people is helpful to just be like, okay, what's the most charitable way that I can say back to you my understanding of this? And then like you can sort of take that and sort of like write down like, okay, here's what we wrote down as like this is that requirement, this is why we have it, right? This is the motivation for it. Get kind of broad agreement on that, and then sort of like move forward where you're like this, given that this kind of like fulfills those things. But yeah, like um, you can't treat people like they're dumb, because it just that's again kind of that bad place where like you're not like as soon as people stop trusting each other, like you're gonna ask for something that's totally reasonable in 6 months, and they're just gonna say, "Man, like that jerk." I'm gonna say no right away, right? There's a lot of discretion in these things, and I guess the thing I did have experience with that is like dealing with. I used to be a lawyer, and I used to deal with like government administrators. Um, and that's kind of like a similar thing where you're like, oh man, it's so stupid. I have to file this in triplicate. But if I make a big fuss about filing it in triplicate, I'm gonna have to do three other things. So you want to kind of like try to build that relationship, and then over time, if you do have that relationship, it's easier to kind of like educate and bring in other resources about how to do it.
Thank you. I think that's such a good lesson in communication in general, and like thinking about like even when you're sharing visualizations with like people from the business as well. Or I'm checking the chat to see if there's any other questions. Kevin, I see you asked a question which may have been answered, but want to make sure that I get to that as well. Do you want to provide any additional context?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, other than I guess the RStudio Connect that you were using, how else? What were other tools that you were using for like leveraging with RStudio to help with your goals with security?
Those are the two main ones. We also do have our Studio Package Manager, which we use. I wouldn't say we do anything particularly interesting with it, but it's useful. I've had a good experience with all of those. These aren't the only tools that we use, and these aren't the only sort of layers of security. Like there's this this idea called defense in depth with security, if you want like just many, many layers. So these are, but we do use both of those and have been very happy with them. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
I just want to open up to anyone who was on and wants to ask a question live as well. If there's anything that you're still wondering or anything else you're hoping to get out of session today.
I'm also wondering which external package that you're using most right now.
Oh, like external, like to just like another like R package.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah, oh, that's a tough question. I did use like so pins was one that I used a lot, and this was kind of something that we stopped doing. We have another thing, but there's this period of time where we had a really urgent data storage change that we needed to make, and the data storage project was late. And so we ended up using kind of like pins in our Studio Connect to kind of like be a little like stopgap until we got the real solution. And so that's something that does like I'm such a fan of pins. It's so simple that it's like just having something where you're just able to like send a file, like have it be like controlled somewhere, like have it on S3 and just have it come back and cached, and it's really nice. So.
Cool. Tatsu, I see that you unmuted, so I'm taking that as raising your hand.
Oh no, I didn't even realize that I muted. I actually have to drop out, Gordon. That was a fantastic presentation, and thanks for educating us. I really appreciate it, and I kind of wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I'm sure glad that I was here. So thanks.
Great.